Hey, beautiful souls, welcome back to Soul Stories. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to join our family. Stay with us, because a new love story is about to begin. The coffee shop on Fifth Avenue was nearly empty when Elena Vasquez walked in, her worn sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. She had received a mysterious message that morning, typed on expensive cream-colored stationery, and slipped under her apartment door. It contained only an address, a time, and a promise that her grandmother's medical bills would be discussed. Elena had almost thrown it away, convinced it was some elaborate scam. But desperation had a way of making people believe in impossible things. She spotted him immediately, sitting alone at a corner table with a view of the street. Alexander Mercer. She recognized him from magazine covers and news articles, though he looked different in person, smaller somehow despite his tall frame. His dark hair was threaded with silver at the temples, and his face, while still handsome, carried a weariness that cameras never captured. He was 42 years old, worth approximately $18 billion, and according to every business publication in the country, he was the most eligible bachelor in North America. He was also, Elena noticed with a start, looking directly at her. Elena was 26, a night shift nurse at a community hospital in Brooklyn, and she had spent the last 3 years watching her grandmother slowly fade from a disease that had no cure but had plenty of expensive treatments. She had sold everything, worked double shifts, and still the debt accumulated like snow in winter. She had no idea why a man like Alexander Mercer wanted to speak with someone like her, but she walked toward his table with her chin held high, determined not to show fear. He stood when she approached, which surprised her. Billionaires, she had always assumed, did not stand for anyone. His eyes were gray, the color of storm clouds, and they studied her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. He gestured to the chair across from him, and she sat, folding her hands in her lap to keep them from trembling. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. A waiter appeared and disappeared, leaving behind 2 cups of coffee that Elena did not touch. Finally, Alexander leaned forward, and when he spoke, his voice was low and measured, as if he had rehearsed this conversation many times. He told her that he was dying. The doctors had given him 12 months, perhaps 14 if he was lucky. A rare degenerative condition that affected his nervous system, something with a long Latin name that Elena recognized from her medical training. There was no cure, no treatment, only a slow and inevitable decline. He told her this without self-pity, without drama, as if he were reading a stock report. His face remained expressionless, but Elena saw something flicker in those gray eyes. Fear, perhaps, or loneliness. Elena asked him why he was telling her this, and he smiled for the first time. It was a sad smile, the kind that never reached the eyes. He explained that he had spent his entire life building an empire. Hotels, technology companies, real estate developments spanning 3 continents. He had sacrificed everything for success, including 2 marriages, countless relationships, and any chance at a normal existence. Now, at the end of his life, he had realized that none of it meant anything. He had no children, no legacy that mattered, no one to carry on his name or inherit his vision. His relatives were vultures, waiting for him to die so they could tear apart everything he had built. His ex-wives had long since moved on to other wealthy men. He was, despite being surrounded by sycophants and employees, completely and utterly alone. And then he said the words that would change Elena's life forever. He told her that he had been watching her for months. He had hired investigators to study her, to learn everything about her life, her character, her values. He knew about her grandmother, about the mountain of debt, about the double shifts and the exhaustion and the quiet desperation that she hid behind a brave smile. He knew that she had turned down 3 marriage proposals from men who could have solved all her problems because she refused to marry without love. He knew that she volunteered at a homeless shelter on her days off, and that she had once given her last $20 to a stranger on the subway who needed it more than she did. He told her that she was exactly what he had been searching for. Someone honest, someone kind, someone who would not be corrupted by his money or seduced by his power. Someone who would raise a child to be a good person, rather than another ruthless billionaire. And then he made his proposal: marry him, give him an heir. In exchange, he would pay off every debt she had ever accumulated. He would ensure that her grandmother received the best medical care in the world. He would give her a trust fund of $50 million, and upon his death, she would inherit everything. His companies, his properties, his fortune, all of it would belong to her and their child. She would never want for anything again. Elena stared at him for what felt like an eternity. Her first instinct was to slap him across the face and walk out. She was not a commodity to be purchased, not a vessel to be rented. The proposal was insulting, dehumanizing, and exactly the kind of thing she would expect from a man who had spent his life treating people as assets to be acquired. She opened her mouth to refuse, to tell him exactly what she thought of him and his money. But then she thought about her grandmother, lying in a hospital bed with tubes, running from her arms, asking Elena every day if the bills were getting paid. She thought about the collection notices piling up in her mailbox, the creditors calling at all hours, the crushing weight of a debt that would follow her for the rest of her life. She thought about the child she had always wanted, but had given up on because she could barely afford to feed herself. She asked for time to think, and Alexander nodded as if he had expected nothing less. He gave her a card with a private number and told her she had 1 week to decide. Then he stood, buttoned his jacket, and walked out of the coffee shop without looking back. Elena spent the next 7 days in a daze. She worked her shifts, visited her grandmother, and lay awake at night staring at the ceiling, turning the proposal over in her mind. She researched Alexander Mercer obsessively, reading every article and interview she could find. She learned that his first wife had left him because he worked too much, and his second wife had left him because he did not know how to love. She learned that he had donated hundreds of millions to charity, but had never attended a single event in his honor. She learned that he was brilliant and ruthless and feared and admired, but not a single source described him as happy. On the 7th day, Elena called the number on the card. She did not know if she was making the biggest mistake of her life, or the smartest decision she had ever made. All she knew was that her grandmother deserved to live, and she deserved to be free from the chains of poverty that had bound her family for generations. She told Alexander that she would marry him, but she had conditions. She would be treated as a partner, not a possession. She would have a say in how their child was raised, and she would not share his bed until she was ready, regardless of what any contract might say. Alexander agreed to everything without hesitation, and 3 weeks later, they were married in a private ceremony at his estate in Connecticut. Elena wore a simple white dress that she had chosen herself, and Alexander wore a dark suit that probably cost more than her car. There were no guests except the lawyer who drafted the prenuptial agreement and a photographer who documented the occasion for legal purposes. Elena signed her name on the marriage certificate and felt nothing except a vague sense of unreality, as if she were watching herself in a movie. The first few months were strange and awkward. They lived in separate wings of Alexander's mansion, crossing paths occasionally at meals or in the library. He was polite but distant, treating her with the same courteous detachment he might show a business associate. Elena tried to focus on her new life, exploring the vast estate, learning to navigate a world of servants and luxury that she had never imagined. Her grandmother was moved to a private facility with round-the-clock care, and for the first time in years, Elena slept without dreaming of overdue bills. But something unexpected began to happen. Alexander, despite his reputation for coldness, proved to be a complicated man. Elena discovered that he spent hours every day in his garden, growing roses with the care and attention that he had once devoted to building companies. She learned that he loved poetry and could recite entire works from memory. She found out that he visited a children's hospital every month, reading stories to sick kids and donating enough money to keep the facility running. He never mentioned these things, never sought credit or recognition. She only knew because she paid attention, because she was starting to see the man behind the myth. Slowly, tentatively, they began to talk. Really talk, not just exchange pleasantries over breakfast. Alexander told her about his childhood, about a father who had beaten him and a mother who had looked the other way. He told her about the loneliness of success, about being surrounded by people who wanted his money but not his company. He told her about the diagnosis, about the fear that kept him awake at night, about the regrets that haunted him. And Elena really listened in a way that no one had ever done before. 6 months into their marriage, Elena realized that she was falling in love with him. It was not the passionate, consuming love of romance novels, but something quieter and deeper. A love built on respect, on understanding, on shared silences and late-night conversations. She saw W past the cold exterior to the wounded man beneath, and she found that she wanted to heal him, to give him the peace he had never known. When she came to his room that night, Alexander looked at her with surprise and something that might have been hope. He asked her why, and she told him the truth. She said that she had married him for money, but she was staying for him. She said that she did not care about the fortune or the empire or the legacy. She only cared about making whatever time he had left meaningful. And then she kissed him, and for the first time since the diagnosis, Alexander Mercer cried. Their son was born 9 months later, on a spring morning when the roses in Alexander's garden were in full bloom. They named him Daniel, after Elena's grandfather, and Alexander held him in his arms with a wonder that transformed his entire face. Elena watched them together and knew that she had made the right choice, not for the money or the security, but for this, for the chance to give this broken man a reason to live. Alexander's condition progressed slowly, stealing his strength and his mobility bit by bit. But instead of retreating into bitterness, he embraced every moment. He spent hours with Daniel, teaching him about flowers and poetry and the importance of kindness. He spent evenings with Elena, holding her hand and watching the sunset from their balcony. He rewrote his will, not to protect his fortune, but to ensure that Elena and Daniel would be surrounded by love and support when he was gone. On his last day, 14 months after the doctor's prediction, Alexander lay in bed with Elena beside him and Daniel asleep in her arms. He told her that he had lived more in this 1 year than in all the decades before. He told her that she had given him something that all his billions could never buy. He told her that he loved her, and that he would carry that love with him wherever he was going. Elena held his hand as he took his last breath, and she did not cry. She had learned from him that death was not an ending but a transformation, that love did not disappear when the heart stopped beating. She carried that love with her as she raised their son, as she used the fortune to build hospitals and schools and shelters, as she created a legacy that Alexander would have been proud of. Years later, when Daniel asked about his father, Elena told him the truth. She told him about a billionaire who thought he had everything but realized he had nothing. She told him about a proposal that sounded like a transaction but became a love story. She told him about a man who learned to live only when he was dying. And she told him that sometimes the best things in life come from the strangest places, and that love, true love, can grow in the most unexpected soil.